Okay, deep divers. Today we are taking a serious plunge into quite a fascinating stack of sources you brought us. We're really zeroing in on a relationship that's, well, it's been making headlines and raising a lot of eyebrows.
Yeah.
We're talking about the complex, often pretty volatile dynamic between two individuals who hold, just immense power and influence Donald Trump and Elon Musk.
It's definitely a dynamic that captures a lot of public attention, isn't it? And the material you've gathered here, it gives us a really useful way to look at it. We've got reporting from, established news outlets like Al Jazeera, SRF, giving us the facts, the analysis, but then it's right alongside these discussions from online forums like Reddit threads.
Right.
And those give you a window into, well, public perception, a lot of speculation, and sometimes some really sharp, even conflicting viewpoints.
Exactly. So our mission in this deep dive is basically to unpack all of this. We want to pull out the key insights, try to figure out what these sources are suggesting is really going on in this relationship. How does it impact their, overlapping business and political interests? And importantly, what do some of these perspectives claim might be their end game?
And as we start looking through these sources, one thing becomes clear almost immediately. This isn't like a simple story, not just friendship or a straightforward rivalry.
Well,
The material really points to a turbulent mix. You've got public conflict, maybe some behind-the-scenes stuff, definitely shared interests on some things, and potential consequences that could, ripple outwards in pretty significant ways. So yeah, let's get into what the material actually tells us.
right. And the first thing that just jumps out, especially from the recent news coverage you included, is how public their current friction is. Sources explicitly confirm there's a public conflict happening. Boltwise mentions this straight up.
Yes, and AP News adds a bit more color, describing this conflict as flaming out just as intensely as it started, which kind of suggests a pattern, maybe? Intense, maybe unpredictable interactions between them. And the fact that articles from IT Boltwise and SRF dated, June 9, 2025,
Yeah, here.
are focusing on this just underscores that this is happening, right now. It's unfolding as we speak, basically.
And we see Elon Musk himself taking a very aggressive public stance in this conflict. Al Jazeera reports on him making what it calls public attacks.
That's right. And one specific action that gets highlighted, particularly in Al Jazeera, is Musk's move this week to join up with a group often called the Senate Republican Deficit Hawks.
Okay.
Basically, lawmakers really focused on cutting government spending, the national debt, that sort of thing. He joined them specifically to argue against the scope of a House budget bill. And this is significant because it puts him directly against certain legislative priorities and, potentially creates tension with parts of the Republican Party who might actually support that bill. It's a clear political move.
And the reaction to that, according to the sources, it was pretty strong. Al Jazeera quotes a White House official describing Musk's moves as infuriating.
That word infuriating. Yeah, it speaks volumes, doesn't it? It suggests that Musk's actions are seen at the very top levels of government as, deliberately provocative, problematic. It indicates a real level of tension there beyond just a public disagreement.
And beyond just the political reaction, the sources also point to immediate business impacts tied to this public spat, especially for Tesla.
Right.
Al Jazeera reports that, in the middle of all this, Tesla shares reportedly took a plunge.
And that's a direct, tangible financial consequence mentioned right there in the material. And the sources even try to put a number on the potential cost. JP Morgan analysts, according to Al Jazeera, predicted a potential, get this, $1.2 billion hit to Tesla's full-year profit.
Wow, $1.2 billion just from this. That's a massive potential impact on profit.
It is, and it didn't stop there, apparently. They also predicted an additional $2 billion setback specifically to regulatory credit sales.
Okay, maybe we should quickly explain those credits.
Yeah.
Regulatory credits, they're basically like emission credits that EV makers like Tesla earn for hitting certain environmental or sales targets, right?
Exactly.
And then other car companies that don't meet those targets can buy these credits from Tesla to, make up the difference. And selling these has been a really significant high-margin source of cash for Tesla.
Absolutely critical.
So yeah, a $2 billion hit to that area alone. That's substantial.
It really is. And the sources explain that this predicted $2 billion hit is tied to separate Senate legislation that's targeting California's EV sales mandates, which are kind of the foundation for the value of those credits.
Okay.
So it suggests the whole political and legislative environment is kind of piling on the financial pressure on Tesla, alongside the direct fallout from the Trump-Musk conflict itself.
Right.
Al Jazeera quotes Jed Ellerbrook, he's a portfolio manager, who explicitly links that budget bill we mentioned earlier to this. He says it contains bad stuff for Tesla with the end of the EV credits. And Ellerbrook also adds that this falling out with Trump carries risks not just for Tesla, but, and this is key, for Elon's other companies too.
Interesting.
It points to a perceived broader vulnerability for Musk's whole business empire in this kind of politically charged climate.
But Al Jazeera also notes something else, that Musk's public attacks, particularly the ones seen as critical of certain political groups, have apparently, quote, upset potential Republican Tesla buyers. That's according to Dennis Dick.
Yeah.
So you see a potential impact not just, on Wall Street or in D.C., but directly on maybe consumer feelings, maybe sales, which is another big concern for the business, obviously.
It just shows how quickly a political fight involving people with such huge public profiles can spill over and have really concrete consequences in the marketplace, especially for a brand like Tesla that deals directly with consumers.
Now, this conflict seems to be dragging in another one of Musk's big companies. And this one, well, it has even higher stakes because of its close ties to the U.S. government. SpaceX. Sources like SRF explicitly state that SpaceX is, quote, caught between the fronts in this whole dispute between Trump and Musk.
And this is where things get critically important, really, because SpaceX is way more than just a commercial launch company.
Definitely.
It holds vital contracts, huge responsibilities with the U.S. government, NASA, the military. And the Al Jazeera source highlights a truly remarkable and frankly potentially alarming threat Musk apparently made in this context.
What was that?
He said he would decommission Dragon aircraft.
Decommissioned Dragon.
Yeah.
And the source explains why that's such a big deal, right? The Dragon spacecraft is, as the source puts it, the only U.S. spacecraft capable of flying humans in orbit and used by NASA.
Exactly. This isn't just, one option among many. It is the main way the United States currently gets its astronauts to and from the International Space Station.
Yeah, it brought back human spaceflight capability for the U.S. after the shuttle retired.
Precisely. So, threatening to take this critical national asset, which is vital for NASA's ongoing work, for the U.S. presence in low Earth orbit, threatening to take it offline in the middle of a political or business fight. Well, according to the sources, it shows a potential willingness by Musk to leverage assets that are deeply tied up with national interests.
It really underscores just how integrated SpaceX is with the U.S. government's space operations. The Wikipedia source you pulled adds some crucial context here, detailing SpaceX's role. It holds NASA's Commercial Crew Contract, CCTCAP, that's the program for flying astronauts. It competes for critical U.S. military launches under the NSSL certification. And it designs and launches military satellites for the Space Development Agency, part of this new missile defense setup.
Which, as that same Wikipedia source mentions, has itself drawn attention from countries like China and Russia. There are concerns it could spark an arms race in space.
Right.
So when sources say SpaceX is caught between the fronts, the implication is that this conflict between Trump and Musk, it doesn't just affect stock prices or electric cars. It could potentially touch on really fundamental issues of national security, international stability, America's actual access to space, given what SpaceX does and how much it depends on government contracts. The vulnerability of these crucial contracts, these capabilities, when faced with a political clash between a former president and the company's CEO, that's a really significant point these sources are raising.
Okay, so that covers the immediate, very public fallout and the pretty serious stakes involved, especially for their key businesses, Tesla and SpaceX. But let's step back a bit. Given the intensity of this conflict and the scale of what's involved, what do the sources suggest might be the deeper reasons, the underlying motivations, or even the potential endgame for Trump and Musk?
Yeah, what's really driving this?
The material you provided offers a fascinating, really wide-ranging set of perspectives on this. Some are quite provocative. Let's dive into what these different viewpoints tell us. Maybe start with the perspective that focuses heavily on, well, wealth and simple self-interest.
This theme comes up a lot in the online discussions you included. Multiple commenters just keep coming back to the idea that protecting or maybe increasing their huge fortunes is the main driver. For example, Ario argues directly that the core motivation for both of them is just to protect their wealth. Simple as that.
And that seems to connect with what AGC 843 said, specifically mentioning Musk's alleged desire to be the first trillionaire as a major force behind what he does.
Right. It's not just about keeping what they have, but aggressively getting more, which leads into a more complex and maybe controversial idea from Dubsac 550.
Okay.
This commenter speculates that the endgame involves using their wealth and influence to crash certain commodities or economies and then buy up the pieces at rock-bottom prices.
Whoa.
Yeah.
That's a pretty stark view. Like engineering chaos just to profit from it.
Yeah, it's a perspective suggesting a deliberate strategy to make money from disruption. And the commenter contrasts this supposed strategy with the general U.S. economic growth that, as they put it, has already helped billionaires, implying this is maybe a way to keep accumulating wealth when straightforward growth isn't enough or accessible at their level anymore. So it frames their actions not just as opportunistic, but maybe as a planned maneuver. And other commenters reinforce this general idea of just fundamental self-interest. TLDR uses the term self-enrichment, and Chalbert takes it even further, suggesting their self-interest is the only thing they care about. And if anything good happens for society because of what they do, well, that's just an accidental side effect.
So any wider benefit isn't part of the plan, just maybe an unintended consequence.
Precisely. And Life Goodies offers a particularly pointed summary of this view. They state the ultimate goal is simply to make the world safe for billionaires to become trillionaires. This perspective really boils down all their complex actions, all the rhetoric, to just a simple, raw pursuit of personal wealth. And creating an environment where that kind of accumulation is not just possible, but actively encouraged and protected.
And on a similar, maybe somewhat cynical note, there's the perspective framed as the grift.
Yep.
Yamp the Gatekeeper is quoted saying, it's all about the grift, everything else is just noise.
Yeah, this grift viewpoint is kind of the ultimate reductionist take you find in these sources. It just throws out any potential ideological or complex motivations and says, look, everything is basically a scam, a scheme for personal gain, for extraction. It's a very harsh judgment on what fundamentally drives them, according to this view.
Okay, moving beyond just money. The sources also strongly highlight power and adulation as potential core drivers. Weary Mamala on Reddit makes this point pretty vividly. They state that both enjoy demonstrating their power. Like, I can say and do whatever I want and nothing and nobody can stop me. Here, watch.
That perspective really emphasizes the psychological side, right? The need to assert dominance, to feel untouchable. It's about the public performance of power.
Yeah.
And Weary Mamala also notes they seem to love adulation and want to be praised and adored by their fans. Trump's continued political rallies, even when he's not actively campaigning, get cited as an example of this. It suggests a deep-seated need for that external validation, for the cheers from the crowd.
And Weary Mamala suggests that maybe for these guys, it's just easier to say outrageous things and do flagrant acts than make awe-inspiring changes. Like, the immediate buzz of being disruptive and getting attention is more appealing than the hard, slow work of actually making substantive changes. The focus, according to this view, is just on being the center of attention.
Yeah, it's presented as preferring the drama, the immediate feedback you get from causing a stir, overachieving, meaningful long-term results. TLDR echoes this, describing it as a dopamine rush from abusing power or being cheered on by a crowd, framing it almost like a psychological addiction to control and public approval.
That connects right into the political landscape. IT Boltwise notes that Musk's political ambitions could actually be threatened by this conflict with Trump.
And this point is crucial because it implies Musk isn't just a businessman trying to navigate politics. Maybe he has his own aspirations within the political sphere that he needs to protect or advance.
Right.
One commenter, Octonut9044332, speculates specifically about the potential influence Musk might try to wield over a future political figure, maybe even a VP, asking how much sway and a unelected skunk Musk their words might have. This points to the idea that influence itself, maybe even more than holding office, could be a key part of the endgame, at least for Musk.
And then there's a very personal, very high-stakes political motivation mentioned in these sources. The idea that just staying out of jail is a driving force for both of them.
Yeah, that comes up. Ranger2199 references a specific moment, mentioning a Tucker Carlson interview where Musk allegedly said he believed he'd be going to jail if Trump wasn't elected. And similarly, a now-deleted comment directly cites Trump's motivation as including, well, staying out of prison.
So this adds a really profoundly personal calculation into their political actions and how they interact. If the sources are right in pointing this out as a motivator, it puts their maneuvering into a frame of pure self-preservation against legal trouble,
Yeah,
which could be a powerful, maybe defensive driver for their political strategies.
definitely. And the Watson source adds an interesting, potentially different angle on the power dynamic here. It suggests that Donald Trump might actually see himself in a role maybe similar to Putin wanting to politically disempower and control the oligarchs, the powerful, wealthy people, within his own country.
That directly contrasts with the earlier idea raised by Cuban and others implicitly, that it's the oligarchs, or wealthy guys like Musk, who are steering or controlling the president.
It's a fascinating point of tension right there within the sources themselves, isn't it? Is Trump the potential tamer of powerful billionaires, or is he actually susceptible to their influence? The sources seem to present both possibilities. It highlights the uncertainty, the conflicting interpretations of who really holds the power in these interactions.
And then, on a much more dramatic scale, some sources get into the possibility of really grand ambitions. Secret Temperature 71 and Key P1 use the pinky in the brain reference, suggesting that the real, maybe outlandish endgame could actually be world domination. Key P1 elaborates a bit, referencing Trump's sudden interest in places like Gaza as potentially part of a larger scheme of global acquisitions.
While it's clearly presented with some hyperbole, pinky in the brain, this perspective found in the online chat suggests that some observers see their actions as part of a really large-scale, ambitious, maybe disruptive play for global power or control, something extending far beyond just U.S. politics or business.
Yeah.
It's an extreme interpretation for sure, but it's there in the material.
And related to political control, some sources describe Trump's perceived goal as setting up an ultra-nationalistic, isolationist America that he can control as a king, basically, without international bodies getting in the way. Russia is explicitly mentioned as a model for this vision by Unavowable Drain and Condé K, including the idea of controlling the population through government structures, state media.
Right. This paints a picture of a deliberate move towards a more maybe authoritarian and inward-looking country, where the leader has consolidated power by getting rid of external constraints, internal dissent, aiming for absolute control over the national story, the national structure. It's a view that sees the political endgame as fundamentally reshaping the American system itself.
Okay, let's pivot now to the perspectives focused more on government reform and deregulation. This is an area where the sources offer quite different takes.
Yeah, definitely conflicting views here.
Puzzle-headed Ad4481 suggests that Trump, maybe advised by people like Musk, intended to reduce government bloat and unnecessary spending, framing this as a goal that, should theoretically be bipartisan.
Yes, this view sees a genuine desire there to improve efficiency, cut waste. Frequent Day 5221 elaborates on this supposed goal, describing it as the destruction of the civil service bureaucracy, which they say had become like a branch of government unto itself. This commenter argues for implementing merit-based hiring and ending identity-based hiring, suggesting the system has become inefficient or maybe ideologically driven, not based on merit.
And sources like D2FERPI also claim the underlying aim is simply to slash the large amounts of fraud and waste on the government.
So from this angle, the motivation is presented as a genuine try, maybe heavy-handed, but genuine to make government smaller, more efficient, less wasteful. However, the sources also present some sharp counter-arguments.
Right. Scales of Eubis 19 argues directly against the idea that just cutting resources will somehow improve how government works, suggesting it could actually have negative effects, like making public services slower, citing the DMV as an example.
Yeah, the classic DMV example. And then there's a much more critical viewpoint in a deleted comment suggesting the opposite of reform, that they are actually willfully destroying the government so they can privatize the functions and make it for profit.
Whoa, okay. That flips the script completely.
It does. It suggests the real goal isn't efficiency, but deliberately weakening public institutions so that government functions, assets, lucrative contracts can be transferred to themselves and their friends. The commenter argues this would involve getting rid of pesky things like environmental protections, health and safety to make more profit, using examples like frack the countryside and drill baby drill to illustrate what that might look like.
And Stillwater 215 specifically sees Musk's motivation in this area as wanting his own companies less regulated, even suggesting he might be willing to break the federal government to make that happen.
Which aligns that privatization view with Musk's personal business interests, suggesting deregulation for his ventures is a key driver, possibly even a destructive one.
Yeah.
The sources also include some pretty heated discussions about what actually counts as wasteful government spending. Commenters debate whether money for programs like housing immigrants or USAID is necessary or wasteful. That's El Cuervo 2666, Remote Minimum 9544, Frequent Day 5221. El Cuervo 2666 specifically pushes back against cutting immigrant spending and mentions USAID money being used for things like preserving native languages in Guatemala, which they note others might just dismiss as woke.
Right.
Frequent Day 5221 suggests that if you really want to find waste, you should look at military acquisitions instead.
So it's clear from these really contrasting viewpoints that the sources offer no simple answer here. Is it about genuine, if maybe rough, government reform? Or is it a strategic move towards privatization and personal profit, with very different ideas about what that means for the public good?
Absolutely. The exact same actions are seen through vastly different lenses by these commenters.
Whoa.
It really highlights the deep disagreement on the fundamental intentions at play.
Okay, moving on to perceived societal and ideological goals, particularly within the frame of the so-called culture war. Stillwater 215 notes Trump's stated goal to end woke.
This is a theme that comes up again and again in the discussions, and it's often framed, like Okibi does, as a culture war against wokeism. This commenter suggests this involves presenting straw man arguments, simplified, distorted versions of what the other side thinks, to build up the mindset of pursuit of heroism, purity, and desire for a united, like-minded national community.
Interesting.
The idea is that creating this narrative lets people feel heroic by fighting against this perceived enemy, wokeism, maybe instead of confronting more complex issues or past wrongs.
Alter-Altishta provides a deeper look, based on the source's context, at Trump's idea of decadence. They describe it as basically anything deemed superfluous, unnecessary, wasteful, woke, and divisive. Specific examples given include DEI initiatives, diversity, equity, inclusion, transgender ideology, and certain parts of the bureaucracy.
This commenter also tackles what seems like an obvious contradiction. Trump's own personal history often involves things others might see as decadent, right? Like overeating, casinos, affairs.
Yeah.
Alter-Altishta explains this by suggesting Trump isn't against all forms of perceived excess, but he's specifically pushing against a redefinition of decadence that includes these particular woke things he targets. It's presented as a cultural battle over definitions, over values.
And this leads right into a highly charged, really debated topic within the sources. Whether the underlying goal is literally an all-white country, or if it's a nationalism based on cultural, social, and ideological conformity and nativism, maybe with a racial component.
That's
Alter-Altishta, puzzle-headed ad 4481, digital legal driver discussing this.
This is clearly a very sensitive area, and the sources reflect that tension. Puzzle-headed ad 4481 and Digital Eagle Driver push back strongly against the idea of wanting an all-white country. They point out that Trump's wife and Elon Musk himself are immigrants.
Right.
They argue the focus is purely on illegal immigration, which Digital Eagle Driver claims has a negative net impact and raises concerns about modern-day slavery related to low-wage jobs.
Okay.
Alter-Altishta, however, argues that while the explicit goal might not be a literal all-white country, there is a racial component where outgroups are racialized. This commenter describes the nationalism they see being sought as based on conformity to a specific set of traditional American values, where other identities or perspectives have to be subjugated or even erased to be considered truly American.
So even just within this specific set of sources, there's significant disagreement on how to interpret Trump's stance on immigration and national identity. Is it primarily about legality and economics, or is it about a more exclusionary form of cultural, maybe even racial nationalism?
Precisely. It really underscores how polarizing these figures and their rhetoric are, leading to vastly different, sometimes diametrically opposed interpretations of what their ultimate societal goals might be.
Finally, some sources offer perspectives suggesting the endgame might not actually be as strategic or, complex as some of these grand theories make it sound.
Like maybe it's simpler.
Yeah. Initiative 197783 and Stock Edge 3905 express doubt that Trump himself has really put that much thought into it, suggesting he might be more reactive or maybe influenced by others, perhaps think tanks like the Heritage Foundation.
This view basically posits that all the intricate analysis of grand strategy might be projecting complexity onto actions that are just, opportunistic, or driven by immediate impulses or maybe outside advice. Alter-Altishta adds to this by noting that adhering to ideologies, like fascism for instance, doesn't necessarily require deep intellectual thought. It can thrive simply on having true believers.
TLDR offers an even simpler explanation. Maybe it's just more about what's good for me right now.
Yeah, just to focus on immediate personal benefit, immediate gratification, rather than some carefully planned long-term objective. Digital Eagle Driver describes Musk in this context as a complete nihilist, implying a lack of any real overarching purpose or belief system beyond, personal power or disruption. And Frequent Day 5221 repeats the description of Trump as a con man, someone who is just out for himself and no one else, boiling his motivations down to pure self-serving opportunism.
So looking across all these different perspectives present in the sources, wow. We see a truly complex picture of potential endgames attributed to Trump and Musk.
Yeah, that's a lot.
They range from the seemingly straightforward goal of protecting and massively growing personal wealth,
Right.
to the pursuit of power and public adulation, to specific, really impactful political objectives like maybe government privatization or even establishing a more authoritarian ultranationalist state, to fighting a culture war aimed at ideological conformity. And then you have the views suggesting it's less strategic, more reactive, driven by immediate self-interest, or even just personal character flaws, like being a con man.
It's really clear that the public, at least as reflected in these varied sources, is struggling to find one single unifying explanation for the actions and interactions of these two incredibly influential, often unconventional figures.
Yeah.
The material you provided doesn't give us one definitive answer, does it? But rather, a rich tapestry of possibilities and strong, often conflicting opinions about what their true motivations and objectives might be.
Okay, this raises an important question then. Beyond the public fighting and these perceived potential end goals, what other significant challenges and criticisms are highlighted in the sources? Specifically regarding Musk and his companies, and maybe Trump too, that might influence this whole dynamic, their effectiveness, or just how the public sees them.
Right, what baggage are they carrying into this?
Let's look at the challenges presented for SpaceX and Musk first, as found in this material.
Okay. Well, the sources point to some significant concerns about worker safety at SpaceX. Reuters specifically reports that injury rates for SpaceX workers have been soaring, and notably, they exceeded the industry average for a second year running.
For a second year. That suggests a persistent issue, not just a blip. That's definitely a serious concern for any company, especially one doing such complex, potentially dangerous work.
Absolutely. And then Engadget, the New York Times, The Verge, Reuters, The Guardian, plus mentions of a lawsuit filed by former workers, they all point to serious allegations of a culture of sexual harassment at SpaceX.
Wow, multiple sources.
Yeah, with former workers and interns speaking out, filing lawsuits. These are multiple sources reporting on similar allegations from different people over time. This includes that specific report in Insider about a $250,000 payment made to a flight attendant who alleged sexual misconduct by Musk himself back in 2016.
Right, I remember reading about that.
So the sources kind of aggregate these various reports to present a picture of significant internal workplace challenges.
And following an open letter, reportedly written by employees, that was critical of Musk's behavior and leadership style. Sources like The Verge and Axios reported that some of the employees involved in writing that letter were actually terminated.
Which, as presented in those reports, definitely raises questions about how dissent, how internal criticism is handled within the company's culture. It suggests, according to these sources, potential consequences for employees who voice concerns about the CEO's conduct.
There's also been legal scrutiny. NPR reported on a Justice Department lawsuit filed against SpaceX, specifically for allegedly not hiring refugees and asylees. Although Reuters and the Immigration Policy Tracking Project did later note that the U.S. government subsequently said it would drop that specific case.
Right.
But the initial lawsuit itself highlighted potential challenges regarding hiring practices, compliance with anti-discrimination rules, according to the source.
The fact that the suit was filed at all, regardless of how it eventually turned out, is noted in the sources as a significant legal challenge they faced. And beyond that specific case, the New York Times reported more broadly that SpaceX and Musk face federal reviews after violations of security reporting rules.
Okay, so ongoing issues with regulatory compliance in different areas, not just hiring. And on a more personal note for Musk, The Independent reported that SpaceX was actually warned against seeking higher security clearance for him, specifically because of alleged drug use.
Yeah, that report raises potential challenges regarding his access to classified information, maybe his eligibility for contracts that require high-level security clearances, which could have implications for some aspects of SpaceX's work with the government as presented in that source.
Definitely. Finally, another significant area of criticism for SpaceX highlighted in the sources is environmental impact. NPR, Defenders of Wildlife, and Space.com all mention criticisms about SpaceX's operations down in Texas.
Boca Chica.
Yeah, including alleged negative impacts to the Boca Chica area itself and pollution from a Starship explosion.
This points to the environmental challenges that are just inherent in developing and launching these huge rockets, right? And the tension between really ambitious tech goals and the need to mitigate the ecological footprint. These sources document that tension.
Okay, now let's turn to the challenges and criticisms directed at Donald Trump, based only on the sources you've provided for this deep dive, of course.
Right, sticking to the material.
Frequent Day 5221 on Reddit is pretty blunt, describing Trump simply as Kakan man, pure and simple.
Yeah, that commenter and others really characterize his actions and his public persona primarily through that lens of deception, of manipulation. This same commenter also states that Trump's focus is solely being out for himself and no one else, which reinforces that idea of fundamental self-interest we talked about earlier as a perceived motivation, but framed here as a core criticism of his character.
The sources also contained a pretty lively debate, especially among the online commenters, about Trump's self-proclaimed status as a super successful businessman.
Oh, yeah.
Commenters like Gold Standard 420 and Toys Before Boys directly argue against this. They list numerous specific examples they claim represent business failures.
Like what?
They mentioned the bankruptcies of 4 casinos, the Trump University case, which was found to be fraudulent, had to pay people back, and other ventures like Trump Steak, Trump Vodka Wines, Trump Airlines, all reportedly failed.
So contrasting the public image he often projects with specific historical examples cited in these sources, trying to challenge the very foundation of his business reputation. It's a direct critique of his alleged competence and honesty in business.
Honjura 31 offers a more, maybe, ideological and psychological critique, describing Trump as representing everything the patriarchy that developed from misinterpreting the Bible stands for, and specifically highlighting a perceived lack of self-reflection.
That commenter links his behavior, his values, to broader societal structures and critiques, suggesting a persona defined by a rigid, maybe backward-looking and unexamined set of beliefs and behaviors.
And just many 1973 and Nebraskans present a specific, quite sensitive criticism, raising the idea that a child has been used, in their words, as a prop or shield.
Right, referring to the public appearances and use of his young son, interpreted by these particular commenters as a deliberate tactic, maybe for PR or deflection, rather than just genuine family interaction.
So the sources definitely lay out a range of significant challenges and criticisms for both Elon Musk and Donald Trump, from serious allegations about workplace safety and culture, regulatory compliance issues, environmental concerns for Musk and SpaceX, to fundamental questions about Trump's character, his business integrity, his personal conduct. All is presented in these specific materials we've been looking at.
And these criticisms, whether they come from news reports or public commentary online, they undoubtedly contribute to the broader public perception surrounding both of these figures, and they surely play a role in the complex context of their relationship and how its dynamics are unfolding.
So, okay, what does this all mean? Looking across this really diverse collection of sources, the news reports detailing the public conflict, the business impacts, and then the online discussions, speculating, sometimes widely, on motivations and endgames. Plus these reports of challenges and criticisms. The relationship between Donald Trump and Elon Musk is clearly multifaceted and intensely scrutinized.
It involves highly public conflict with significant, very tangible business implications for major global companies like Tesla and SpaceX. We saw that clearly. And beneath that surface conflict, the sources offer this rich, although often conflicting, array of perceived motivations, ranging from those fundamental drives, wealth, power, attention, to specific political and societal restructuring goals. And even those more cynical views centered purely on self-interest or just disruption.
It's definitely not one simple story, is it? The sources present vastly different, sometimes totally contradictory viewpoints and interpretations of their actions, their intentions. It really highlights the complex, often kind of opaque nature of their dynamic and its potential impacts. And also the deep divisions in how the public even perceives these figures.
Absolutely. And given the sheer scale of their influence, I mean, it spans technology, finance, politics, even space exploration, and the potential impacts discussed in these sources, from the future of EVs and human spaceflight to really fundamental questions about the nature of government and society, it leaves you with a lot to consider.
Indeed. thinking about the confluence of their individual power, the often, let's say, unconventional approaches, and the incredibly high stakes involved in their respective domains, it really prompts the question, doesn't it? How might this complex, often turbulent dynamic between these two incredibly powerful individuals shape not just their own futures, their own trajectories, but potentially reshape aspects of our world in ways we probably can't even fully predict right now?
Yeah.
It's definitely something worth mulling over long after this deep dive concludes.